Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya.
The Ultimate Fighting Championship and MMA in general has become incredibly popular over the last couple of years, with fighters like Israel Adesanya and Kamaru Usman being essential to the growth of the sport. Slowly but surely, the future of the fighting tournament is changing from being a mostly American affair to now having champions from all over the world. But you'll be surprised to hear that although everyone in the sport wants to be the best, some fighters like Kamaru Usman refuse to fight others based on principle alone. So whether you're a fan of the Nigerian champion or just want to find out what's behind his refusal to fight Israel Adesanya, you've come to the right place, as we're about to take a deep dive into the two Africans and essentially discover why Usman has refused to fight Israel. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. But before we get into the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you don't miss any of the new videos we post. Who is Kamaru Usman? First off, to really know what lies at the basis of Usman's decision, we have to learn a bit more about the man behind the nightmare. Born Kamaruddin Usman on the 11th of May 1987 in Auchi, Nigeria, Kamaru apparently battled with the livelihood that he had in the country. His father was away for large stints of time due to his obligations as a soldier in the Nigerian military, while his mother took on the role of a teacher in the community. While his parents were away for quite a large part of the day, he had his only two brothers to play with and tended to get into quite a bit of trouble as a result. After quitting the life of a military man, his father decided to dedicate his time to the pharmaceutical industry, becoming a pharmacist. This allowed him to move to Dallas, Texas with his family when Kamaru was only 8, and explains why the fighter is considered to be both an American and Nigerian professional mixed martial artist. It's a good thing that Usman moved along with the rest of his family, as wrestling as a sport is non-existent in Nigeria. To those of you who don't know, it was Kamaru's participation in wrestling that really built on his competitive nature and formulated the passion he has now in the octagon. Surprisingly, he only started wrestling in his sophomore year in high school, where he experienced his coach having quite a bit of difficulty pronouncing his name. Because of this, Kamaru was nicknamed Marty, which stuck with him throughout his amateur wrestling career, with his overall record at this level being an insane 53-3 in high school, thus placing him third in the Texas State Championships. In college, Usman initially wrestled for William Penn University, but after some frustrating and political issues, decided to switch over to the University of Nebraska at Kearney. And on top of his college success, he ended up taking the title of NCAA Division II National Champion at 174 pounds, finishing up the season with a 44-1 record and 30 straight wins. Suffice it to say, Kamaru ended up making it big even before starting his true and tested professional career. It was then in 2012, a full 2 years later, that Kamaru made his debut in professional MMA, competing for several regional promotions and obtaining a record of 5-1. In February of 2015, he was then announced to have been selected as one of the fighters in the Ultimate Fighter 21, which saw him face off against some of the greatest names in the industry. A few weeks later, and the world was looking at their new Ultimate Fighter, which resulted in Kamaru being awarded a 6-figure contract with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC for short. He made his debut in the UFC later that same year and ended up winning by unanimous decision against fellow fighter Leon Edwards. But the Nigerian Nightmare, as he was later called, decided to strike up some controversy in his only second fight, where he was set to face off against two-time Jiu-Jitsu world champion Sergio Moraes. Rather than step up to the plate though, Kamaru decided to bow out for undisclosed reasons, causing him to be replaced with Luan Chagas. It won't surprise you to hear that the vast majority of fans of the UFC thought he did so because he was scared to lose. But Kamaru had a chance to change their minds by finally facing the champion a full year later in 2017, where he ended up knocking Sergio out cold with a single punch in the first round. He was then declared the UFC welterweight champion in 2019 after pummeling Tyron Woodley in the co-main event of UFC 235, granted the win by unanimous decision after dominating like a man possessed. Kamaru went on to defend his title, which he still has to this day. On the topic of defense, the Nigerian Nightmare has actually defended his title for the third time now, surpassing the record of the former welterweight champion Georges St-Pierre for the largest win streak in the division with 13. So as you can tell, Kamaru Usman isn't just your everyday UFC fighter, he's a man on a mission. Who is Israel Adesanya? Israel Adesanya, on the other hand, has made waves in the UFC middleweight division by becoming the undisputed champion of the class. Born in Lagos, Nigeria on the 22nd of July 1989 to a family of 5 children, Israel attended school there and learned a little bit of Taekwondo until he was removed by his mother due to injury. He then relocated to Ghana for around 10 months. But this was short-lived after his parents decided that education was the most important thing. This resulted in the family moving to Rotorua, New Zealand when he was just 10 years old. A real geek at heart, Adesanya was never really interested in sports and became quite familiar to consuming large amounts of Japanese anime shows ranging from Death Note to Naruto. This resulted in the last stylebender being bullied quite a bit at school, which essentially led him to learning as much as he could about mixed mixed martial arts. Once he had graduated high school, he enrolled at the Universal College of Learning in Wanganui, where he attempted to obtain a degree in computer design. At the age of 18, he also started to train quite exclusively in kickboxing, and a full 2 years later, he made the difficult decision to cease his studying and try out a career as a kickboxer. He took to the style like an absolute maniac and was able to obtain an unbeaten record of 32-0 on the amateur kickboxing scene. He then moved on to the professional circuit, where he was able to achieve a record of 75-5. In his kickboxing career alone, he has been able to knock out a grand total of 48 contenders, making him a dangerous man to meet in the ring. He has also tried his hand at professional boxing in 2014, when he debuted against champion Daniel Aman. Although Israel ended up losing this match on a points decision, the majority of boxing fans had no idea how this could have happened. The controversial decision was, however, overcome by Israel, who went on to reach a personal record of 5-1, showing that regardless of what style Adesanya chooses to use, he is always bound to be victorious eventually. Israel Adesanya then amassed a record of 11-0 on the amateur MMA circuit, with each and every one of his wins being the result of a knockout or total knockout, which caused him to be well liked across the globe. He debuted in the UFC by taking on Rob Wilkinson at UFC 221, and by the second round, Wilkinson was unconscious on the ground. A short while later, Israel was able to take the title of UFC middleweight champion. To this day, he is still considered to be undefeated in his professional MMA career, standing second only to the streak of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Fans of Israel Adesanya have come to know two things when it comes to his time in the octagon. Firstly, he's most likely going to win, and secondly, there's more than 70% chance that this win will be the result of a knockout. For that very reason, Adesanya has become one of the most popular fighters in the UFC today. So why won't Kamaru fight Israel? Although Israel Adesanya has mentioned he might consider moving up a weight class in the future, Kamaru Usman has been quite adamant about not wanting to fight his Nigerian brother from another mother. In an interview with ESPN, he famously said that he wouldn't take Adesanya on because of the long-standing friendship between the two of them. That being said, fighters often compete against their friends nowadays. Gone are the times when people only fought because they thoroughly dislike their competitor. It is a job after all, and it is essentially no different than playing rugby or football against a friend's team. His actual quote gives a lot more of an indication on why he doesn't want to take Israel on, though. In his own words, quote, "If Izzy's willing to move up, well, he is moving up, but if he's willing to give up that 185-pound belt and says, I have nothing to do with that anymore, then absolutely I would entertain that thought. On no account right now would I ever entertain going up to fight Izzy. That's just not something I'm interested in." So it would seem that Kamaru is not interested in fighting Israel, mostly due to the fact that they are currently within separate divisions. While he is the welterweight champion, Israel is the middleweight champion. But if Israel chooses to change the division he is fighting in, which he is rumored to be doing quite shortly, then it's possible that Usman would entertain the thought of taking him on. Something else Usman said really drove the point home of why he doesn't want to fight Israel. According to him, "I've stated over and over before, I'd rather have 2 Africans with belts as opposed to 1 African with 2 belts. After March, it's going to be 3 Africans with 4 belts. It's a good time to be an African." So all in all, it appears that nationalism is the only reason why Kamaru doesn't want to take Israel on. He would rather have a number of Africans at the top at the same time than one with all the titles. What do fans think? That being said, fans have looked at the careers of both Israel and Kamaru and come to the conclusion that Kamaru's decision is less about nationalism and more about fear of loss. You see, as talented as Kamaru is, the majority of his wins have been decided on point decisions. It's true that he has his experiences with knockouts, but when it comes to Israel, this is a whole different story, since the majority of Israel's wins have been recorded knockouts, with a great many of them actually coming in the first round of the match. The fear is that Kamaru won't have enough time to work up points before finding himself on the floor of the octagon. So what do you think about his refusal? Feel free to let us know in the comment section down below.